Okay guys, so in this video I'm going to walk you through the three most common layout systems that you use in CSS and HTML. So let's get into it. So the versions of layouts that we're going to go through is the float approach, and then we're going to talk about flex, and then we're going to talk about grid. So first and foremost, let's look at the float system. Now the float is the way that it's been used. Like, it's one of the oldest ways to make a layout in HTML and CSS. It's the thing that existed before Flex and Grid, and before that we did it with tables. But floats is pretty much the old timer in this little lineup of ours. So the way that it works is basically that I have my body element here, and I declare I have a nav element that is representing my header. And then I have a main area which represents my content, and then I have a footer that represents my footer. Easy peasy. Now, in order to achieve this effect where everything lines up from left to right, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to declare on each of my elements, I'm going to basically say that, all right, I want to float you left, and I'm going to use the float property. The float property allows me to declare that I want to take this document out, or rather I want to take my element out of the document body and float it to one side or the other. In other words, push it to the top left in this scenario, or the top right if I say float right. And that's basically all there is to it. And then apart from that, I am setting a minimum width of 33.333% in order to achieve this three column layout, where I want to just divide my total area, the total width that I have, into three equal parts. And that's basically it. Now, the thing that is important to remember here is that when you use a float, what you're actually doing is that you're pulling out the element out of the document, or of the natural flow of the document. To illustrate this, we can have a look at, say, the nav element. Notice that my nav element here is 538 pixels times 40 pixels. But if I hover my main, it has a height of 0 pixels. Now, why is that? Well, if we look at my element here, we see that, all right, that is 404 pixels in height. Okay, but that's probably because of my min height, right? So if I click that and I don't have a min height anymore, we see that it's only the content that dictates the height of the element. And if I hover that, it's 18 pixels, right? But how is it that my containing element is 0 pixels? Well, that's the float. If I remove the float, now I actually have a height dimension, and that is exactly that's exactly the behavior that I'm describing here. What you're doing when you're floating something is that you're pulling that element out of the natural flow so that you can basically float it top left or top right. That's basically how it works. And in order to kind of mitigate this, because there's something you need to be aware of, and that is basically how to use the clear. And clear is just a way for you to declare that, all right, I want the following element, because when you're floating something, remember, if you float, you're pulling that element out of the document flow. So if I have the clear and I hover, notice that my Chrome is highlighting the bottom element here. But if I remove the clear, now all of a sudden my element is up here. And the reason because of this is, as I said, it's because this containing main element has no height. It has not, because of that everything is floated inside of that element. It has, from the browser's perspective, there is no height. So in order to express that, all right, I want you to ignore this effect and just allow the document to keep on flowing as previously, I'm simply saying clear both. Now I don't have to do both here, because this property is just declaring which side I am ignoring the float. So if I say float left, because all of these elements are floated to the left, if I say clear left, I get the expected behavior. If I do right, however, I lose that, because now I'm saying that, okay, everything to the right, everything that is floated to the right, should be treated as I just want to ignore the things that are floated to the right. So this is basically equivalent. Like if you just do left, or if you want to be on the safe side, you can just do clear both. So that's the old way of doing a layout. But if we have a look at, say, Flexbox, where you have it's a little bit different. So we still have our nav element and our footer element, and then we have our main area. So the way that we do this is that we say, okay, I want to display everything inside of my content area here. I want to set the display property to flex. If I remove this, you see that, all right, we get a quite a different, like a drastical change in behavior. So what I've said now is that this container element is a flex box. And each element, then I basically declare how I want the flex to work. Now, the flex property, the shorthand here, is basically declaring, okay, I want the growth of my element to be 1, and I want the shrink of my element to be 1, and then I want just to declare auto for, which is the default for the flex basis. Now, what does all that mean? Well, basically what it means is that I'm telling each of my columns here how I want them to behave within the container. So if I wanted to say flex grow, which is the first property here in the shorthand, and I say 2, what I've just said is that, all right, in relationship to the rest of my elements in this flow, I want you to be twice, I want you to grow to twice the size of your siblings. So I'm saying here that I want you to grow, given all the available space, make yourself twice as big as the other 2 elements that we have here, or the other 2 columns. I can also remove you, or rather I can say 0, and like say that, all right, you, in proportion to everything else, you're supposed to be like, yeah, I hope you get the kind of understand how this works. I can also, of course, make this completely insane and make it 10 times like the other elements on the page, right, or in the box. So, what about shrink then? Well, if I said something like this, let's say that I go and say flex shrink, and I say 2. Notice that nothing happens. And why is that? Well, the reason why nothing's happening is because the elements within the box have a size that perfectly fits the container. What does that mean? Well, if we go and look at the flex basis, and the flex basis property is just a way for me to declare the initial size of my flex elements. So if I set that to 100 pixels, that's still going to work. But if I keep on incrementing this number, we will start to notice something. We will start to notice that as I go higher and higher, notice that the first column is actually shrinking. Or rather, the effect is that the column is shrinking. And the reason why that is because I've declared that it should shrink twice as fast as the other elements. So why is it shrinking? Well, it's simple. Because the main element, right, the page width is 538 pixels, but I am pushing this number on each column. So if you multiply 302 by 3, you'll know like that's a lot more wider than the containing element. But I can also express that I don't want anybody to shrink. I just want, there should be no shrinking involved as we grow in size. So what's happening now is that the first 2 elements, these 2, they are not shrinking, but the third column is going to shrink at the rate of twice whatever the others are doing. But since there's nobody else has declared that they are supposed to be shrinking anywhere, so it doesn't really matter. But if I set this to 0, notice that the behavior is now very different, where I've said that, all right, I don't want you to shrink even if you go outside of the bounds of my containing element. And that's what Flexbox allows you to virtually do. It allows you to just express that you want the elements to either shrink or grow in proportion to the container. And this is a fairly good stand. Like it's up to date. You can use Flexbox for most projects. It's fairly well supported. Finally, we have the grid, which is one of the newest addition to our CSS standards when it comes to things that are very relevant for layouts. And grid it's pretty cool actually. So the way that it works is that now I can declare in a very similar way to what I did with Flexbox. I can say that on my containers, I want everything inside to have a certain behavior. Instead of saying flex, I say display grid. But what's the difference between Flexbox and grid in this scenario is that on Flexbox, I declare on each element the behavior I want. In other words, here I declare on each column that I want them to be a certain, like I want them to shrink or I want them to grow or whatever I want to do, right? But grid works a little bit differently, where it works from the container in. In other words, I'm declaring on the container how I want the behavior to be. So I still have my holy grail layout, and here I'm saying that, okay, I want to declare some template areas. So I want the area that is declared to be the header. And if we look at my element here, we've seen that I have set my grid area on my nav element to be named header. And that's just me labeling my area, like this element, as the grid area that is called header. So I then can go and use my template areas to declare my template. And if we read this, the first part of the string here is just header, header, header. And what this means is basically that I'm saying that, all right, given a layout of 3 columns, I want each of the columns to contain the element header on the first row. And then I have my next string here, which is content, content, content. And you can probably surmise that it's the same thing here. I'm saying that, okay, on row number 2, I want all 3 columns from left to right to contain the content area. So it takes up 3 columns. And the footer is the same thing. So here I can declare, I have declared 3, this basically what I'm using is the template columns property, which allows me to declare a template of the columns. I'm saying that I want each column to be 1 fraction of the total page, and the fraction unit is basically just a way for you to say that, okay, given the total size of something, make this a unit of that's a fraction of that size. That's basically it. So if I have a look at, you see that they are equal now when it comes to the columns, but if I go here and I say that, hey, I want this to be twice the size, you'll notice that the column now is distorted, where like the area is actually twice as wide as its siblings. And then finally we have the rows, where I declare how high I want each row to be. And this is actually kind of nifty, because now I can actually very dynamically declare the sizes I want for each of my rows. So I can grow things and I can shrink them. It's fairly intuitive. That's at least how I feel about it. So finally, I also wanted to touch on that if you're paying attention here, you notice that the body has a declared grid, but I've also declared a grid on my content area. Now this is basically me doing the same thing. Like a grid can contain several subgrids, so you can actually declare a grid on every single element if you wanted to, if you're making complex compositions or layouts, which I think is pretty handy actually. So we set display grid here as well. And this is also, notice now that I have a grid area here called content. So this area here is actually both a part of the parent grid, which is on the body, and it's also containing its own grid. So I do the same thing here. I have column 1, column 2, column 3, and I have my columns outlined in a fraction, and then I only have 1 row because I don't want multiple rows. And if we go inside here, notice that we have declared column 1, column 2, and column 3. So these are the 3 ways that you generally see people do layouts on the web, and each of these should probably have more of a deep dive, but I just wanted to touch on the bare bone basics of each and some of the considerations. Grid is something that you can use, but it's fairly recent and it's not that backwards compatible. You can use polyfills to kind of leverage some of it, but it's still a little bit early in my opinion to start, unless you only cater to the more modern browsers. It's going to be a little bit of a wait before Grid is fully supported, and it is fully supported, but it's not at the point yet where you can just use it for every project, unless, as I said, you're only supporting most of the modern browsers, because the older ones will not support CSS Grid at this point. So what I like to think about when I do layouts is, okay, do I need to support really, really old browsers, like really, really way back? Then I always use a float. If I am going to have to support the current browsers and a few of the older ones, I use Flex. And then if I'm really bleeding edge and like building something that is only going to be supported in the most recent browsers, then Grid is my preferred preference. So yeah, that's basically it. Have a great day.